Jessica Monroe had always been seen as someone doing her best. At just 24, she was already a single mother to 6-year-old Lily, a quiet little girl with big brown eyes and a gentle smile. Jessica's life hadn't been easy. She'd been in and out of unstable relationships, worked 2 jobs to keep a roof over their heads, and often leaned on her mother for support. But to outsiders, she seemed to be managing. When she met Brandon Ellis at a local gas station, she was drawn to his youthful charm. He was just 19, but he carried himself with confidence that felt reassuring. They started talking, texting, and within a few weeks, Brandon was spending most nights at Jessica's apartment. Jessica believed she had finally found someone who understood her struggles. Brandon didn't mind that she had a child, and he even offered to babysit Lily. When Jessica worked night shifts, it seemed like a gift. Jessica told her friends that Brandon made her feel young again, seen, and appreciated, something she hadn't felt in years. She ignored the age gap. She ignored the fact that Brandon had dropped out of high school and had no job. She believed love would fill in the gaps. At first, Brandon acted like he cared about Lily. He would bring her candy, offer to play games with her, and try to get her to laugh. But something about their interaction never felt natural. Lily was shy around him, unusually quiet. She began to keep to herself more often. The little girl who once drew colorful pictures and talked about her dreams of becoming a ballerina now spent more time in her room, alone and silent. Jessica thought Lily was just having trouble adjusting to the changes. She didn't see a reason to worry. Then came the small bruises. When Lily's grandmother noticed marks on her arms during a visit, she grew concerned. Jessica shrugged it off, saying Lily had fallen while playing at school. The bruises didn't stop. Lily became more withdrawn, and her sleep patterns changed. She would wake up crying, clutching her favorite stuffed bunny, refusing to say what was wrong. Jessica was exhausted and overwhelmed, chalking everything up to stress or growing pains. Neighbors started to hear things through the apartment walls, thuds, crying, strange noises late at night. One neighbor, Mrs. Donahue, knocked on Jessica's door to ask if everything was okay. Jessica smiled, said Lily had nightmares sometimes, and thanked her for checking in. She didn't mention that Lily had started wetting the bed again, or that the little girl flinched whenever Brandon came too close. Despite all the warning signs, Jessica believed things were getting better. She told herself Lily just needed time to adjust. Brandon assured her that he loved them both, that he was stepping up as a father figure. Jessica wanted so badly to believe she finally had a real family that she ignored the voice in her head and the fear in her daughter's eyes. Lily's transformation became more noticeable with each passing week. Her once cheerful demeanor had faded entirely. At school, her teachers were the first to grow deeply concerned. A girl who used to run to the swings with excitement now sat alone during recess, staring at the ground or fiddling with her sleeves. She rarely spoke unless prompted, and sometimes jumped at sudden sounds. Her teacher, Miss Grant, made several notes in Lily's file: behavioral change, frequent absences, and visible bruises. When Lily did show up to class, her eyes looked tired, and her body seemed frail. The most alarming part was how she reacted. When someone raised their voice, even slightly, she would flinch or curl into herself as if expecting to be struck. The school counselor, after observing her for a few days, decided it was time to intervene. Lily was brought in for a gentle session, where she mostly remained quiet. But what stood out were the faint red marks on her arm, shaped almost like teeth. The school filed a report with Child Protective Services. A social worker visited Jessica's apartment 2 days later. Jessica had been warned ahead of time, likely by the school. By the time the social worker arrived, the place looked spotless. Toys were neatly arranged, snacks were laid out, and Brandon, charming and well-spoken, answered every question with a smile. Jessica stood by his side, insisting he was a wonderful help with Lily. Lily barely spoke during the visit. She sat stiffly on the couch, her eyes fixed on the floor. When asked about the marks on her arm, Jessica quickly said it was from the neighbor's dog. The social worker didn't see a reason to dig further. The file was marked low risk, and the case was closed. What no one realized was that Lily's bruises weren't accidents, and the bite marks weren't from any dog. Brandon had begun isolating her more. Jessica, wrapped up in her work and relationship, failed to notice just how much time Brandon spent alone with her daughter. Neighbors who once heard laughter from the apartment now heard silence. Or worse, brief sounds of distress followed by eerie quiet. One neighbor, a young man who lived downstairs, started keeping a log of what he heard. He noted the time, the sounds, and even tried recording some of the more disturbing nights. But he wasn't sure what to do with the information. He considered calling the police but hesitated. There was no proof, and he didn't want to cause trouble if he was wrong. Meanwhile, Lily's grandparents continued to express concern. They offered to let Lily stay with them for a few weeks. Jessica refused, saying Lily was fine and that outsiders were trying to ruin her family. She grew defensive whenever someone questioned Brandon. What no one saw was how Lily had started drawing disturbing pictures. Dark figures, red shapes, sad faces. She was trying to speak the only way she knew how, but her cries for help remained unnoticed, dismissed as childish imagination. And with every ignored sign, the danger surrounding her grew closer. It was a Saturday evening in early November, cold and quiet in the small town of Millersville. Jessica was getting ready for her overnight shift at the diner where she worked part-time. She moved through the apartment in a hurry, gathering her things while Brandon lounged on the couch, staring at his phone. Lily sat silently at the edge of the living room, clutching her stuffed bunny, her eyes wide and tired. She had a bad feeling, but she didn't say a word. She knew that when her mother left, she would be alone with Brandon again. Jessica kissed Lily on the forehead and reminded Brandon to heat up the frozen dinner in the freezer. She didn't notice how Lily tensed up when he put a hand on her shoulder. Brandon nodded lazily, pretending to care. The door closed behind Jessica, and everything fell quiet. Outside, the wind howled. Rain began to fall in waves against the windows. Inside the apartment, the lights flickered slightly. Neighbors would later say the building felt off that night, though no one could explain what they meant. Around 9 p.m., the thuds began, soft at first, then sharper. One neighbor heard a loud bang, followed by a child's muffled cry. It lasted a few seconds, and then went completely silent. They turned up the volume on their TV, telling themselves it was just a kid throwing a tantrum. No one called the police. Inside that apartment, Lily was enduring something no child ever should. Brandon's cruelty had escalated over time, moving from verbal torment to disturbing physical abuse. That night, it spiraled into something horrifying. Driven by rage and a twisted desire for control, Brandon lashed out again and again. Bite marks, bruises, and injuries too graphic to imagine were left on Lily's small, fragile body. She had no way to escape, no one to run to. She cried until her voice gave out, her body too weak to resist. At some point during the night, the pain stopped. Not because it ended, but because her body gave up. Lily's heart stopped sometime between midnight and 2 a.m. She died alone on the cold living room floor, surrounded by the chaos of a place that should have protected her. When Jessica returned home early Sunday morning, she expected to find Lily asleep on the couch. Instead, what she walked into was a nightmare. Her daughter lay motionless, her face pale and bruised, her eyes slightly open. Jessica screamed and dialed 911. Emergency services arrived within minutes, but it was already too late. Paramedics tried resuscitation, but there was no pulse. The bruises, the deep bite wounds, and the look of sheer terror frozen on Lily's face told them everything. Brandon stood nearby, watching quietly. He claimed Lily had fallen down the stairs while he was in the bathroom, but investigators had seen enough. Nothing in that apartment made sense, and everything pointed toward Brandon Ellis. The autopsy results were more disturbing than anyone had expected. Lily's body told a story far different from the one Brandon Ellis tried to sell. The injuries were extensive, over 100 visible wounds, ranging from bruises and cuts to deep, intentional bite marks. The forensic pathologist who examined her noted that many of the injuries were not recent, indicating a long period of sustained abuse. But the most shocking discovery was that some of the bite marks were fresh, inflicted just hours before her death, and they were unmistakably human. Police took Brandon into custody the same day the autopsy report came in. At first, he remained calm during questioning, sticking to his story that Lily had fallen down the stairs and that he'd tried to perform CPR. He claimed he didn't know what else to do. But his behavior during the interrogation was unsettling. There was no emotion, no regret, no urgency. Just blank stares and occasional smirks. Investigators obtained a warrant to search Brandon's phone and laptop. What they found sent chills through the entire department. Hidden in a deleted folder were multiple videos recorded over the past few weeks. In them, Brandon could be seen tormenting Lily, mocking her, shouting at her, and in some clips, physically attacking her. One video showed him laughing as Lily sobbed in the corner, too scared to move. Another showed a close-up of a bite mark he had inflicted on her arm, with Brandon whispering something to the camera no one wanted to repeat. The footage was handed over to the district attorney immediately. There was no longer any doubt. This wasn't an accident, and it hadn't happened in a moment of rage. This was deliberate, ongoing torture of a 6-year-old girl. As the case grew stronger against Brandon, attention turned to Jessica. At first, she claimed complete ignorance, insisting she had never seen signs of serious abuse. But investigators weren't convinced. A digital search of her phone revealed text messages from concerned family members, warning her about Brandon. Some texts described Lily's change in behavior and the bruises others had seen. Jessica had responded by defending Brandon, saying people were being paranoid or jealous of her relationship. More troubling were the messages between Jessica and Brandon. In one conversation, Brandon expressed frustration with Lily's behavior, calling her annoying and saying he couldn't deal with her anymore. Jessica replied by telling him to do what you have to, and that she'll grow out of it. Prosecutors believed these messages showed clear neglect, and possibly even passive consent to the abuse. Jessica was arrested and charged with child endangerment and criminal negligence. The community that had once pitied her now turned against her. The image of a struggling single mother was replaced with that of someone who allowed a monster into her home and ignored the cries of her own daughter. The evidence was overwhelming, and the case was moving quickly. The question now wasn't whether they were guilty, but just how much they had ignored, and how many chances were missed to save Lily's life. The courtroom was packed on the day Brandon Ellis faced trial. Reporters lined the front steps, and the small town of Millersville watched in shock as the horrific details of Lily's final days came to light. Brandon sat emotionless through most of the proceedings, occasionally glancing around the room, never once showing remorse. The jury watched in silence as prosecutors presented video evidence, autopsy photos, and expert testimony. The footage from Brandon's phone was shown in short, controlled segments, enough to confirm the extent of the abuse without traumatizing the courtroom. Witnesses were called: Lily's teacher, the school counselor, and even the neighbor who had tried to keep a log of the noises coming from the apartment. Each of them described moments when they sensed something was wrong, but either didn't know how to intervene or were dismissed when they tried. Their voices cracked as they spoke of the guilt they now carried. One teacher broke down on the stand, saying she wished she had done more, pushed harder, made someone listen. Brandon's defense tried to argue that he was overwhelmed, immature, and not equipped to care for a child. But the evidence destroyed any chance of sympathy. The bite mark analysis matched exactly to his dental records. The video footage, the texts, the medical examiner's chilling report, each piece painted a clear picture of calculated cruelty. After a swift deliberation, the jury returned with a unanimous verdict: guilty on all counts, including first-degree murder, child abuse, and torture. The judge sentenced Brandon to life in prison without the possibility of parole. He showed no emotion as the sentence was read. Jessica Monroe's trial followed shortly after. Her charges were less severe, but her failure to protect her daughter drew public outrage. Prosecutors argued that while she didn't directly harm Lily, she had every opportunity to stop what was happening, and chose not to. They showed the texts, played voicemails from concerned family members, and presented the CPS report. Jessica sat through her trial with tears streaming down her face, but many saw them as too late. She was found guilty of criminal negligence and child endangerment and sentenced to 15 years in prison. In her final statement, she said she wished she had listened, that she would carry the weight of her daughter's death forever. But the damage was already done. The town held a candlelight vigil for Lily in the local park. Her old classmates left handmade cards and drawings near a small memorial bench installed in her name. Stuffed animals and flowers surrounded a plaque that read, "In memory of Lily Monroe, a light taken too soon." Local lawmakers used the case to push for stricter child protection policies, calling for more thorough CPS investigations and better training for educators to spot signs of abuse. But for many, it felt like too little, too late. Lily's story became a haunting reminder that silence has consequences, and that sometimes the worst monsters aren't strangers. They're the ones welcomed into our homes.